Tomorrow,
Johnson's office said due to the ruling, the Prime Minister will fly back to London overnight from the UN General Assembly in New York earlier than planned, arriving by the time Parliament resumes. President Donald Trump ordered his acting chief of staff to delay sending $400 million in military aid to Ukraine at least a week before he spoke to that country's president. That's according to what a person familiar with the matter said last night. Trump's July 25th telephone call with the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is the subject of a congressional investigation and is part of a whistleblower complaint. President Trump will address the UN General Assembly in about a half an hour from now. Bloomberg will bring you that address live. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg Tom.
Hey, Michael, thanks so much. Someone that the president has an affinity with, Mr. Bolsonaro of Brazil, beginning to speak at the United Nations. Up 120 points in the Dow. This is Bloomberg.
"25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at storiesofinnovation.njit.edu.
Why is delivering the best client experience a top priority at BNY Mellon's Pershing? Michelle Feinstein, Director of Client Engagement, explains.
Today's investors want a financial relationship that's on demand, customized, and leverages the latest digital technology. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, helping advisory firms and broker-dealers create great experiences for their clients is our priority. Through our integrated wealth experience, we give you a high-touch service, flexible tech choices, and expert insights, so you can deliver a highly personalized experience to your clients at every step, from onboarding to wealth planning, to performance analysis and more. And because we're part of BNY Mellon, you'll benefit from more than 230 years of strength and stability. At Pershing, we're personally invested in your success.
Visit Pershing.com to learn more about Pershing's integrated wealth experience. Pershing LLC and Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC are both members of FINRA and SIPC.
For people who want to feel happier, stronger, fitter, get further, faster, better. For people who want to, but don't always manage to. It doesn't matter how you want to do it, who you want to do it with. It matters that you want to. Virgin Active. We'll find a way for you. Join in September and get 15% off each month on 12-month memberships. Visit virginactive.co.uk. Participating gyms. Terms and conditions apply.
1 in 2 people believe they should check their work email on holiday. 1 in 3 believe it's okay to eat a colleague's lunch. And 1 in 14 believe it's okay to steal loo roll from work. People believe all sorts of strange things. Some people believe that insurance companies try to avoid paying claims. But last year, Zurich paid 99% of insurance claims made by their UK customers. Zurich, an insurance company you can believe in. To find out more, visit zurich.co.uk/99.
Winter might be on its way, but with Jet2 holidays, you can escape the cold. Discover sun-soaked destinations with 4- and 5-star hotels and 22 kilograms of baggage included. So why wait for summer? Book some winter sun now. Jet2 holidays. Package holidays you can trust. APTRA National Protected.
You're in charge of hiring, and Indeed has solutions, like online skills tests, which let a candidate show that they are the right hire. And we give you this toy monkey, who will bang its cymbals when the right CV appears on your desktop. Okay, there is no monkey. There is no monkey. But there are online skills tests.
See why more than 250,000 companies in the UK use Indeed for hiring.
Visit Indeed.com/try today to try skills tests for free today. Terms and conditions apply.
We could play epic music, or we could speak in an overdramatic tone, or even set off fireworks. But that's just not smarty. Instead, we let our offer do the talking. Right now, you can grab 25% off our unlimited data SIM. That's just $18.75 a month with no speed restrictions, no credit check, and no long contract to tie you in. Now that's smarty. Just search Smarty Mobile and switch today. It's easy. Offer available for a limited time only. See smarty.co.uk for terms.
Global news 24 hours a day, on air and at TikTok on Twitter. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. This is Bloomberg Radio. Now, a global news update.
Democratic lawmakers say if President Trump pressured Ukraine's leader to investigate Joe Biden for political benefit, that would be an impeachable offense. Trump reportedly froze $400 million in aid to Ukraine as political pressure to obtain information on Biden's family. Jerry Bodlander is in Washington.
Senator Bob Menendez is top Democrat on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
Are we just going to let the President of the United States extort foreign leaders?
President Trump denies any wrongdoing, saying the money wasn't contingent on an investigation, but the allegations have given new impetus to the impeachment effort in the House.
President Trump goes before the UN General Assembly today with hopes for a multinational response to Iran's escalating aggression. The House of Commons will return tomorrow after the British Supreme Court ruled Prime Minister Boris Johnson's suspension of Parliament was unlawful. I'm John Trout.
You need breaking news and the long view.
What's the government doing in terms of trying to adopt artificial intelligence?
How has that impacted tax receipts?
Bloomberg Markets, weekday mornings at 10 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow, and this update is brought to you by Interactive Brokers. Clients can earn 1.63% on idle cash in their brokerage account. Restrictions apply. Visit ibkr.com/YIB to learn more. And stocks are higher. S&P 500 up 0.4%, up 12 points to 3,004. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 0.4%, or 105 points to 27,056. And the Nasdaq's up about 0.5%, or 36 points to 8149. And President Trump arriving at the UN General Assembly moments ago and speaking to reporters who asked him about the prospects of impeachment. And let's listen in to what he had to say moments ago.
I think it's ridiculous. It's a witch hunt. I'm leading in the polls. They have no idea how they stop me. The only way they can try is through impeachment. This has never happened to a president before. There's never been a thing like this before. It's nonsense. And when you see the call, when you see the readout of the call, which I assume you'll see at some point, you'll understand. That call was perfect. It couldn't have been nicer. And even the Ukrainian government put out a statement that that was a perfect call. There was no pressure put on them whatsoever. But there was pressure put on with respect to Joe Biden. What Joe Biden did for his son, that's something they should be looking at.
And that's President Trump just arriving at the UN General Assembly, speaking moments ago, and this ahead of a speech that he is scheduled to give today. And right now, again, we said stocks are moving higher. Checking the 10-year Treasury now. The 10-year's up 10/32. The yield 1.69%. The yield on the 2-year is at 1.66%. NYMEX crude oil down 1.1%, or 66 cents at $57.99 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.5%. Down $7.20 at $15.24.30 an ounce. Taking a look at currencies right now, the euro, it's at 1.0997 against the dollar. The yen right now at 107.67, and the British pound is at 1.2483. And that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Karen, thanks so much. 10-year yield in 4 basis points gets my attention. Bloomberg surveillance this morning brought to you by Eisner-Amper. Taxes are one of the certainties of life, but what worked for corporate taxpayers in the past may not work today. Eisner-Amper can help. Visit EisnerAmper.com/tax certainty. I'm not going to mention the nation, but long ago, I was given the soup to nuts effort with a ginormous sovereign wealth fund. And I remember sitting with one of their bolt-ons going, what do they do with all this money? Because the numbers they were tossing around, that's great, and you can toss around a gajillion dollars, but if you slice it up, the slices are ginormous. Here to drive that conversation forward, the acclaimed B. Ritholtz. He is with Bloomberg Opinion and is known to podcast fame. And he's just like working up a storm. And I think he's taking a sabbatical where he's doing 8 interviews in a row. So he can get them, archived.
Get a few days off. It would be nice.
You looked at SoftBank, and I think your work on SoftBank is very valuable because it's a mystery to our listeners.
Well, everybody knows about Uber, and last week the story of the week was WeWork's postponing the IPO. But you have to go back and say, what drove the valuations of these companies? Why was the Uber IPO so mediocre? Valuation was a problem. Why is WeWork postponing its IPO? The most recent estimate was like a 70 or 80% drop from the number they originally floated. And the answer all traces back to the Vision Fund, $100 billion behemoth that appears to be too damn big. You can't effectively deploy that much money into venture capital.
To be clear, it's 1/10 $1 trillion.
Right.
And you sit in various skyscrapers. It suits and ties. It looks like the show Succession. It's suits and ties in a fancy meeting room.
Not even suits and ties. It's blazers and khakis and Allbirds.
And
you show up in a suit and tie, they laugh you out of the room.
What's a small business?
So think about this. You look at the markets for public equities, they're tens of trillions of dollars. Venture capital investments, startups, these are companies that are very young. $10 million, $50 million, $100 million. That's a lot of money to these companies. $100 billion is unthinkable. So there are typically 3 stages of venture investing. There's the angel rounds, the friend and family rounds, when it's literally 2 people in a garage, a laptop, and an Amazon cloud.
Your dog's invested in your
That's
startup.
exactly right. Then you have some more developed companies where the idea is pretty fully formed. There's a team in place. They're developing. That's the mid-stage B-round companies. And then the late-stage companies are where they're getting ready to think about getting much bigger, going public, etc. But this isn't $1 trillion worth of assets to invest in. This is a much smaller group. And when you look at the history of venture investing, it's risen 4x since the dot-com implosion almost 20 years ago. But in a typical year in the United States, 80, 90, $100 billion gets invested in venture capital. Imagine one company the size of the total U.S. venture investing, investing pool. It just drives valuations crazy.
So let's talk about Masayoshi Son, the chairman of SoftBank in Japan. This big vision fund, $100 billion fund a couple of years ago, just took everybody on Wall Street, just knocked them on their backs because of the
2017. This is just 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Now he's got some big black eyes in this fund in terms of performance. You mentioned Uber. It looks like he's going to get a bad mark here on WeWork. But they are also in the market for Vision Fund 2. How are they going to raise money given kind of their arguably underperformance relative, I'm sure, to what they were promising their investors?
Sure. So here's the odd thing. For a venture capital firm, they use a lot of debt. When you look at a lot of their investors, and it's everyone from Apple to Microsoft to the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia to just about everywhere else, they guarantee a certain note. They guarantee a certain payment in an era of low yield or even negative yields. Hey, 4, 5, 6% guaranteed payment is really attractive.
It's a Buffett transaction where they get a preferred yield in front of everybody else.
Right, that's exactly right. It's it's literally a preferred holding. So if there is ever a liquidation, is that
in the prospectus of all
Yes,
this
absolutely. This is all well known, well understood by people who follow this. But meanwhile, it puts a lot of risk into the Vision Fund, into SoftBank, because they have to make investments and they have to generate a return in order to carry that note. Very different than the typical venture fund where you put your equity dollars in, Some of them are going to go to zero. Some of them work out okay. Some of them are going to be the 100 baggers. But if it doesn't work out, you don't get your money back. There is no note on the typical VC fund.
So what is the sense here for Masa-san? Because there was some news out in the last week or two that some of their big investors in the Vision Fund 1, I'm thinking some of the wealth funds from the Middle East, they put some serious money, tens of billions of dollars.
Right, literally tens of billions.
And are they putting pressure on SoftBank to do something about their returns?
My general sense, and all of this is behind the scenes, you don't really see a lot of this. My general sense is they're pretty arm's length. They don't really put a lot of pressure on. However, the pre-commitments to the Vision Fund 2, which was scaling up to $110 or $120 billion, those have been scaled way back. This is very likely to not be a $100 billion fund. I think they should consider themselves lucky if it's a $50 or a $60 billion fund.
Barry, one question. Give me an update on Apple. Where you fit with this? All the new products are out, et cetera, et cetera.
So this wasn't a groundbreaking iPhone set of updates, but it was a pretty solid, as a tech watcher, it was a pretty solid set of updates. If you're now sitting with an older iPhone 7 or iPhone 8, they've created a really interesting dispersion of prices. If you want to go the full Monty and get the top of the line everything, it's over $1,000. But they've taken some of their relatively recent models and dropped them to $350. That is a really good price for that sort of phone.
I got to do a longer interview with you. I mean, Apple, I didn't know this. They're up 51%.
Oh, they're killing it this year. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Now, remember, following last year, they didn't.
Oh, yeah. They're almost back to record highs. But it again goes to Ritholtz 101, long-term investment, which we could talk about another time because we're
buy quality companies. If you're going to buy individual stocks, you want to look at quality companies when they're out of favor.
10 seconds. Sell me on the podcast. Who do you got coming up?
This week is Brian Grazer, Ron Howard's partner at Imagine Entertainment. Fascinating guy. Really overcame a lot of learning disabilities as a kid. Sort of a didactic, self-taught philosopher.
Yes.
Very insightful, deeply understands the Joseph Campbell approach to storytelling and narratives and how the hero has to do more than just rescue the girl. There's a philosophical lesson to be learned.
Look at this.
And he tells the story. I had a delightful.
I'm running out of time.
Can I tell you? I had a delightful conversation. He was so interesting.
Great.
Couldn't be more fascinating.
It's like Pauline Kael at the New Yorker years ago. Barry Ritholtz, our movie fiend here with Mr. Glazer coming up as well. Dow up 121 points. Ritholtz won't come in the studio unless there's big green on the screen.
Sure.
I mean, it's just...
I love it when there's red on the screen.
27,071 on the Dow. Major shout out to our team today, starting in London with that historic Supreme Court decision. Stay with us through the day. The president to speak here in moments. This is Bloomberg.
This one shouldn't take long. Of course, if it had a cover, I might not be bothered. Can't see what's under there. And then they'd have chained the back wheel. It would have taken me much longer, especially if the chain's off the ground. Makes it harder to cut. This one doesn't even have a lock on the front. So, in the time I've been talking to you, I've nicked it.
Over 9,000 scooters and motorbikes were stolen in London last year. Lock your bike, chain the rear wheel, and cover it to make it harder to steal. Lock, chain, cover. The Met Police.
Have you ever wondered what a shelf sounds like? How about a lamp? Well, it might just be louder and better than you think. The new Wi-Fi enabled symphonic speaker range from IKEA and Sonos is here. So now you can find out for yourself. Shop in store or at ikea.co.uk and fill your home with feeling. IKEA, the wonderful everyday.
Breathe in and out. Every day, you take 20,000 breaths, potentially exposing yourself to harmful particles of pollution. According to the Royal College of Physicians, air pollution contributes to around 1 in 20 deaths in the UK. But at E.ON, we believe it's time to do something about it. We've committed to installing ultra-fast electric vehicle charge points. We offer solar panels and batteries that collect and store energy. And we've helped a citywide transport operator introduce a large fleet of emission-free electric buses.
It's time to clear the air. Search Eon Clean Air.
Capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at TikTok on Twitter. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Is there any bank right now in the U.S. that you think is a buy?
Do you think Chairman Powell has lost the market?
Jeff Bezos is no dope. What's the big ka-ching?
The big question, I think, for investors is free cash flow.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
The U.S. tariffs actually hurt both China and the U.S.
Large strategics are looking to either buy or invest in innovation.
Soybeans and corn have been basically at or below the cost of production for about 4 or 5 years.
And what we see more bonds, more yield.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Tuesday morning from New York City to our worldwide audience. It is United Nations Tuesday here in New York. And, of course, we will bring the remarks from President Trump coming up in moments as he speaks in front of the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Plus, we'll also get the latest on the Federal Reserve, what its focus will be on the upcoming rate decisions as it looks at both the short end and the longer end of the curve. But first, let's go to John Tucker of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
Yeah, remember, Paul, the consumers in the driver's seat for the U.S. economy. Just out, September consumer confidence, it's falling. It fell to 125.1 from 134.2, so that's a sizable decrease on that front. Stocks, they are rising. The S&P 500 churning near 3,000 for the 10th session, about 1% short of its July record. The tech shares that benefit from easing trade tensions leading today's gains. This was all sparked when the Treasury Secretary Mnuchin confirmed Chinese Vice Premier Liu He is headed to Washington in the coming weeks. But, Dan Morris, senior investment strategist at BNP Paribas, says don't count on any positive news on the trade front to power stocks higher in the future.
Even if there appears to be an agreement that can change the next day, I think, unfortunately, there was a lesson from what happened with Mexico that even if there is an agreement and everything's signed and ready to go, Trump at some point could decide to use the threat of tariffs again to try to achieve some other political economic gain.
Elsewhere, sterling climbing after a court ruling key to Brexit going against Prime Minister Boris Johnson. S&P 500 right now 12 points higher. That's up 0.4%. We're at 3,003. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average 82 points higher. That's up 0.3%. We're at 27,033. The Nasdaq Composite Index up 33 points. That's up 0.4%. We're at 8,146. 10-year yield in the U.S. 167, being pushed further lower as the price increases by 30 seconds. Brent crude right now, the international benchmark down 83 cents at 63.92. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. Well, right now we're looking at some modest gains across the board here in U.S. equities, and you are seeing this coming despite the fact that the latest installation of repo operations by the New York Fed seemed to indicate that there still was pretty strong demand for liquidity from the banks. So trying to square these two things, Dave Wilson, Bloomberg Stocks editor here in our Interactive Broker Studios. Let's just start with the gains that we're seeing today. What is sort of the main driver behind them?
Yeah, it really just looks like the tech stocks kind of leading the way here. I mean, if you pay attention to the 11 main industry groups in the S&P 500, but even there, we're not seeing all that much of a gain. Apple is a stock that jumps out because they have a lot at stake in the European Union in terms of how they've sort of set it up to minimize their taxes. And there were a couple of rulings out of an appeals court there today, and one of them favored Starbucks in a case involving their arrangements in the Netherlands. You know, not that you're seeing a whole lot of movement in Starbucks. It's only 0.3% higher. That said, I mean, it's about the precedent that's being set here. And Apple, I mean, you're talking about billions of dollars in potential liability. So the idea that, you know, maybe things aren't going to be as bad as some folks might have predicted on the tax front, I mean, that's enough to give Apple a bit of a gain here and give tech stocks a lift. But in general, you're still not seeing a whole lot of direction here. I mean, when you look at the S&P 500, it's hanging in above 3,000, and that's kind of where it's been for the last couple of weeks. So it's not like, you know, today is really changing the pattern all that much here.
Essentially, one of the things we just saw, the Conference Board Consumer Confidence Index declined 9 points in September. And that kind of, as we've been talking about the economic backdrop supporting the markets, it's been a story of the consumer really being the pillar of strength in the U.S. economy.
And can I just add that number has really sunk Treasury yields.
Yes.
Price up, yields down. You're seeing the yields take another leg lower. 10-year yields now 1.67% from above 1.7% earlier in the day, 1.72%. So, I mean, just to say, people are viewing this as bearish. Stock markets aren't getting the hint.
Exactly. So it just kind of goes, Dave, when you think about stocks and some of the consumer-oriented stocks, maybe a little bit of concern in the future.
Maybe the challenge is always with a survey like the Conference Board. I mean, to what extent do people's opinions translate into action? Because what you're looking at, are numbers derived from surveys. And sure, they give you some read in terms of what people are thinking at this point, but there's a long way in some instances anyway from what they're thinking to what they're doing. And it's not like we've seen a lot of indications yet that, consumers are really going to backing away. I mean, somewhat, you could argue, in terms of things like housing, but not enough to really suggest that there's any kind of a wholesale retreat here that would be an issue in terms of economic growth.
I think one of the key questions, and we've been talking about it a lot, Paul, is this idea that the manufacturing slump is going to bleed through to the services sector and somehow to the broader economy, or whether this is just isolated to the particular sector. We did get just also data out of the Richmond Federal Reserve about manufacturing came in weaker than expected, actually declining versus the increase, which was the expectation. So two negative numbers hitting at the same time at 10 a.m. today. And this just comes as people start wondering, can monetary policy and easing really offset the effects of the ongoing trade war? And is that even the issue, or is it that we're late in the cycle and frankly, things are going to start souring soon? My question is, are we getting a bearish message from bonds and a positive message from stocks, or is that too simplistic?
Maybe a bit simplistic, if only because, you have really the S&P 500, when you look at it, like I've been saying, it's just sort of stalled out here. It's not like you're really getting a positive message. It's more like you're not getting a negative one. And clearly, you're seeing more volatility in the bond market at the moment than you are in the stock market if you're just looking at yield. So, that's a bit different than we're used to seeing. And it really becomes a matter from there of, how do things play out? I will tell you today, you're seeing relative strength among utility and real estate stocks, and that certainly fits in with what we're seeing in the bond market here.
Yeah, I'll tell you one security that would be interesting, one stock that would be interesting to get a read on the consumer will be Nike reporting earnings, I guess, after the close. And I think they, that'll give you a good sense of the consumer. Because if you remember back in the last quarter, they had a very rare miss in their earnings, the first shortfall in 7 years, and the stock got really hammered. So I think investors will really be looking at Nike to see if they stabilize their business, number one. And number two, can we have any read-through about the consumer here?
Yeah, we're talking about the fiscal first quarter for Nike. And you look at the analyst estimates that we pulled together, and it suggests that they're looking for Nike to, in essence, pull itself out of the hole from late in their most recent fiscal year, looking at earnings growth kind of accelerating as the year goes on, and then stabilizing at higher levels to some extent. You look on the revenue side, it tells a similar story, though it's not like you had an outright decline in profit like you did in the fiscal fourth quarter. So it may well be very telling about what the company's expectations for the consumer are as much as anything.
Well, just a real quick here. I'm wondering, we are getting some ideas that perhaps there's going to be some sort of trade deal. And I'm wondering how much that's also driving the action today, or whether that's perhaps a narrative that doesn't really fit neatly.
It's a bit more difficult, perhaps, if only because, let's face it, how many times have people kind of gone in that direction, and we're going to get a deal, and then all of a sudden, you're back to where you were before.
Exactly right. Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Olson, thanks so much for giving us some thoughts here on this early morning trading here in the markets. Again, a little bit of green on the screen here. The S&P up 10, the Dow up 57, and the NASDAQ up 22. But as Lisa pointed out, 10-year Treasury bonds up 17/30 seconds, pushing that yield down to 1.67%. So we have a mixed message a little bit in the marketplace. Upcoming, we'll we'll have remarks from President Trump from the United Nations. But right now, let's head to our 99.1 studios in Washington, D.C. to Nathan Hager for world and national headlines. Nathan.
Yeah, Paul, as you say, President Trump is at the UN General Assembly, where he will speak to the world body in just moments. But he gave a preview to reporters moments ago.
I think we're doing very well. Let's see what happens with Iran. But we're in very strong position on Iran. And I think they'd like to do something. And I think it would be a smart thing for them if they did.
And the White House has released excerpts of President Trump's speech. He will say that the U.S. does not seek conflict with any other nation, but, quote, I will never fail to defend America's interests, end quote. Meantime, the president continues to defend himself against accusations that he pressured Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden in a July 25th phone call with the new Ukrainian president.
When you see the readout of the call, which I assume you'll see at some point, you'll understand. That call was perfect. It couldn't have been nicer. And even the Ukrainian government put out a statement that was a perfect call. There was no pressure put on them whatsoever.
The source tells Bloomberg the president ordered acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney to delay $400 million in military aid to Ukraine at least a week before the call. 7 freshman Democrats with national security backgrounds have written a Washington Post op-ed saying if the president did pressure Ukraine to investigate Biden, it's impeachable. Boris Johnson won't resign. The UK government says that after the nation's highest court ruled the prime minister broke the law when he suspended parliament.
The judicial process, I have to say, I strongly disagree with what the justices have found. I don't think that it's right, but we will go ahead and, of course, Parliament will come back.
Johnson spoke from the UN General Assembly. He's giving his speech to the world body tonight, then heading back to London early. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and at TikTok, on Twitter, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. In Washington, I'm Nathan Hager. This is Bloomberg. Lisa and Paul.
Thank you so much, Nathan Hager. And we are awaiting comments from President Trump at the United Nations. We will bring those to you live when they begin. Right now, though, let's turn our focus to fixed income, which is brought to you by PIMCO. For investors who demand more than the markets deliver, all investments contain risk and may lose value. Consult your investment professional before investing. Really, the front and center today in debt markets, aside from the negative data that we just got out, was the latest New York Fed repo operations. This one was the first term operation that they had, which basically means that dealers were borrowing for 14 days rather than overnight. They're going to have 3 such operations. Here with us to talk about the implications from the results of this, Ira Jersey, Chief U.S. Interest Rate Strategist for Bloomberg Intelligence. Ira, so there was a lot of sort of hubbub over the fact that this particular operation was oversubscribed, meaning that banks submitted more bids than were currently available by the New York Fed, indicating a very strong demand and possible fear. Is that how we should interpret this?
I think there's actually 2 things that go on with right now with the repo market. Firstly is that there is still a lot of what we call balance sheet constraints. So basically the size of the repo market is too small given the funding needs of...
I'm so sorry. Hold that thought. President Trump speaking. Let's hear his comments.
General, distinguished delegates, ambassadors, and world leaders, 7 decades of history have passed through this hall in all of their richness and drama. Where I stand, the world has heard from presidents and premiers at the height of the Cold War. We have seen the foundation of nations. We have seen the ringleaders of revolution. We have beheld saints who inspired us with hope, rebels who stirred us with passion, and heroes who emboldened us with courage. All here to share plans, proposals, visions, and ideas on the world's biggest stage. Like those who met us before, our time is one of great contests, high stakes, and clear choices. The essential divide that runs all around the world and throughout history is once again thrown into stark relief. It is the divide between those whose thirst for control deludes them into thinking they are destined to rule over others, and those people and nations who want only to rule themselves. I have the immense privilege of addressing you today as the elected leader of a nation that prizes liberty, independence, and self-government above all. The United States, after having spent over $2.5 trillion since my election to completely rebuild our great military, is also by far the world's most powerful nation. Hopefully, it will never have to use this power. Americans know that in a world where others seek conquest and domination, our nation must be strong in wealth, in might, and in spirit. That is why the United States vigorously defends the traditions and customs that have made us who we are. Like my beloved country, each nation represented in this hall has a cherished history, culture, and heritage that is worth defending and celebrating, and which gives us our singular potential and strength. The free world must embrace its national foundations. It must not attempt to erase them or replace them. Looking around and all over this large, magnificent planet, the truth is plain to see. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The future belongs to sovereign and independent nations who protect their citizens, respect their neighbors, and honor the differences that make each country special and unique. It is why we in the United States have embarked on an exciting program of national renewal. In everything we do, we are focused on empowering the dreams and aspirations of our citizens. Thanks to our pro-growth economic policies, our domestic unemployment rate reached its lowest level in over half a century. Fueled by massive tax cuts and regulations cuts, jobs are being produced at a historic rate. 6 million Americans have been added to the employment rolls in under 3 years. Last month, African American, Hispanic American, and Asian American unemployment reached their lowest rates ever recorded. We are marshaling our nation's vast energy abundance, and the United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world. Wages are rising, incomes are soaring, and 2.5 million Americans have been lifted out of poverty in less than 3 years. As we rebuild the unrivaled might of the American military, we are also revitalizing our alliances by making it very clear that all of our partners are expected to pay their fair share of the tremendous defense burden which the United States has borne in the past. At the center of our vision for national renewal is an ambitious campaign to reform international trade. For decades, the international trading system has been easily exploited by nations acting in very bad faith. As jobs were outsourced, a small handful grew wealthy at the expense of the middle class. In America, The result was 4.2 million lost manufacturing jobs and $15 trillion in trade deficits over the last quarter century. The United States is now taking that decisive action to end this grave economic injustice. Our goal is simple. We want balanced trade that is both fair and reciprocal. We have worked closely with our partners in Mexico and Canada to replace NAFTA with the brand new and hopefully bipartisan U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. Tomorrow, I will join Prime Minister Abe of Japan to continue our progress in finalizing a terrific new trade deal. As the United Kingdom makes preparations to exit the European Union, I have made clear that we stand ready to complete an exceptional new trade agreement with the UK that will bring tremendous benefits to both of our countries. We are working closely with Prime Minister Boris Johnson on a magnificent new trade deal. The most important difference in America's new approach on trade concerns our relationship with China. In 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization. Our leaders then argued that this decision would compel China to liberalize its economy and strengthen protections to provide things that were unacceptable to us and for private property and for the rule of law. 2 decades later, this theory has been tested and proven completely wrong. Not only has China declined to adopt promised reforms, it has embraced an economic model dependent on massive market barriers, heavy state subsidies, currency manipulation, product dumping, forced technology transfers, and the theft of intellectual property, and also trade secrets on a grand scale. As just one example, I recently met the CEO of a terrific American company, Micron Technology, at the White House. Micron produces memory chips used in countless electronics. To advance the Chinese government's 5-year economic plan, a company owned by the Chinese state allegedly stole Micron's design, valued at up to $8.7 billion. Soon the Chinese company obtains patents for nearly an identical product, and Micron was banned from selling its own goods in China. But we are seeking justice. The United States lost 60,000 factories after China entered the WTO. This is happening to other countries all over the globe. The World Trade Organization needs drastic change. The second largest economy in the world should not be permitted to declare itself a developing country in order to game the system at others' expense. For years, these abuses were tolerated, ignored, or even encouraged. Globalism exerted a religious pull over past leaders, causing them to ignore their own national interests. But as far as America is concerned, those days are over. To confront these unfair practices, I placed massive tariffs on more than $500 billion worth of Chinese-made goods. Already, as a result of these tariffs, supply chains are relocating back to America and to other nations, and billions of dollars are being paid to our Treasury. The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. But as I have made very clear, I will not accept a bad deal for the American people.
As we endeavor to stabilize our relationship, we're also carefully monitoring the situation in Hong Kong. The world fully expects that the Chinese government will honor its binding treaty made with the British and registered with the United Nations, in which China commits to protect Hong Kong's freedom, legal system, and democratic ways of life. How China chooses to handle the situation will say a great deal about its role in the world in the future. We are all counting on President Xi as a great leader. The United States does not seek conflict with any other nation. We desire peace, cooperation, and mutual gain with all. But I will never fail to defend America's interests. One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. The regime's record of death and destruction is well known to us all. Not only is Iran the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism, but Iran's leaders are fueling the tragic wars in both Syria and Yemen. At the same time, the regime is squandering the nation's wealth and future in a fanatical quest for nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them. We must never allow this to happen. To stop Iran's path to nuclear weapons and missiles, I withdrew the United States from the terrible Iran nuclear deal, which has very little time remaining, did not allow inspection of important sites, and did not cover ballistic missiles. Following our withdrawal, we have implemented severe economic sanctions on the country. Hoping to free itself from sanctions, the regime has escalated its violent and unprovoked aggression. In response to Iran's recent attack on Saudi Arabian oil facilities, we just imposed the highest level of sanctions on Iran's central bank and sovereign wealth fund. All nations have a duty to act. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. As long as Iran's menacing behavior continues, sanctions will not be lifted. They will be tightened. Iran's leaders will have turned a proud nation into just another cautionary tale of what happens when a ruling class abandons its people and embarks on a crusade for personal power and riches. For 40 years, the world has listened to Iran's rulers as they lash out at everyone else for the problems they alone have created. They conduct ritual chants of death to America and traffic in monstrous anti-Semitism. Last year, the country's supreme leader stated Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible, and it will happen. America will never tolerate such anti-Semitic hate. Fanatics have long used hatred of Israel to distract from their own failures. Thankfully, there is a growing recognition in the wider Middle East that the countries of the region share common interests in battling extremism and unleashing economic opportunity. That is why it is so important to have full, normalized relations between Israel and its neighbors. Only a relationship built on common interests, mutual respect, and religious tolerance can forge a better future. Iran citizens deserve a government that cares about reducing poverty, ending corruption, and increasing jobs, not stealing their money to fund and massacre abroad and at home. After 4 decades of failure, it is time for Iran's leaders to step forward and to stop threatening other countries and focus on building up their own country. It is time for Iran's leaders to finally put the Iranian people first. America is ready to embrace friendship with all who genuinely seek peace and respect. Many of America's closest friends today were once our greatest foes. The United States has never believed in permanent enemies. We want partners, not adversaries. America knows that while anyone can make war, only the most courageous can choose peace. For this same reason, we have pursued bold diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. I have told Kim Jong-un what I truly believe, that like Iran, his country is full of tremendous untapped potential, but that to realize that promise, North Korea must denuclearize. Around the world, our message is clear. America's goal is lasting. America's goal is harmony. And America's goal is not to go with these endless wars that never end. With that goal in mind, my administration is also pursuing the hope of a brighter future in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, the Taliban has chosen to continue their savage attacks. We will continue to work with our coalition of Afghan partners to stamp out terrorism, and we will never stop working to make peace a reality. Here in the Western Hemisphere, we are joining with our partners to ensure stability and opportunity all across the region. In that mission, one of our most critical challenges is illegal immigration, which undermines prosperity, rips apart societies, and empowers ruthless criminal cartels. Mass illegal migration is unfair, unsafe, and unsustainable for everyone involved. The sending countries and the depleted countries, and they become depleted very fast, but their youth is not taken care of, and human capital goes to waste. The receiving countries are overburdened with more migrants than they can responsibly accept, and the migrants themselves are exploited, assaulted, and abused by vicious coyotes. Nearly 1/3 of women who make the journey north to our border are sexually assaulted along the way. Yet here in the United States and around the world, there is a growing cottage industry of radical activists and non-governmental organizations that promote human smuggling. These groups encourage illegal migration and demand erasure of national borders. Today I have a message for those open border activists who cloak themselves in the rhetoric of social justice. Your policies are not just. Your policies are cruel and evil. You are empowering criminal organizations that prey on innocent men, women, and children. You put your own false sense of virtue before the lives, well-being, and countless innocent people. When you undermine border security, you are undermining human rights and human dignity. Many of the countries here today are coping with the challenges of uncontrolled migration. Each of you has the absolute right to protect your borders. And so, of course, does our country. Today, we must resolve to work together to end human smuggling, end human trafficking, and put these criminal networks out of business for good. to our country, I can tell you sincerely, we are working closely with our friends in the region, including Mexico, Canada, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, and Panama, to uphold the integrity of borders and ensure safety and prosperity for our people. I would like to thank President Lopez Obrador of Mexico for the great cooperation we are receiving and for right now putting 27,000 troops on our southern border. Mexico is showing us great respect, and I respect them in return. The U.S., we have taken very unprecedented action to stop the flow of illegal immigration. To anyone conducting crossings of our border illegally, please hear these words. Do not pay the smugglers. Do not pay the coyotes. Do not put yourself in danger. Do not put your children in danger, because if you make it here, you will not be allowed in. You will be promptly returned home. You will not be released into our country. As long as I am President of the United States, we will enforce our laws and protect our borders. For all of the countries of the Western Hemisphere, our goal is to help people invest in the bright futures of their own nation. Our region is full of such incredible promise, dreams waiting to be built, and national destinies for all. And they are waiting also to be pursued. Throughout the hemisphere, there are millions of hardworking, patriotic young people eager to build, innovate, and achieve. But these nations cannot reach their potential if a generation of youth abandon their homes in search of a life elsewhere. We want every nation in our region to flourish and its people to thrive in freedom and peace. In that mission, we are also committed to supporting those people in the Western Hemisphere who live under brutal oppression, such as those in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. According to a recent report from the UN Human Rights Council, women in Venezuela stand in line for 10 hours a day waiting for food. Over 15,000 people have been detained as political prisoners. Modern-day death squads are carrying out thousands of extrajudicial killings. The dictator Maduro is a Cuban puppet, protected by Cuban bodyguards, hiding from his own people, while Cuba plunders Venezuela's oil wealth to sustain its own corrupt communist rule. Since I last spoke in this hall, the United States and our partners have built a historic coalition of 55 countries that recognize the legitimate government of Venezuela. To the Venezuelans trapped in this nightmare, please know that all of America is united behind you. The United States has vast quantities of humanitarian aid ready and waiting to be delivered. We're watching the Venezuela situation very closely. We await the day when democracy will be restored, when Venezuela will be free, and when liberty will prevail throughout this hemisphere. One of the most serious challenges our countries face is the specter of socialism. It's the wrecker of nations and destroyer of societies. Events in Venezuela remind us all that socialism and communism are not about justice. They are not about equality. They are not about lifting up the poor. And they are certainly not about good of the nation. Socialism and communism are about one thing only: power for the ruling class. Today I repeat a message for the world that I have delivered at home. America will never be a socialist country. In the last century, socialism and communism killed 100 million people. Sadly, as we see in Venezuela, the death toll continues in this country. These totalitarian ideologies, combined with modern technology, have the power to excise new and disturbing forms of suppression and domination. For this reason, the United States is taking steps to better screen foreign technology and investments and to protect our data and our security. We urge every nation present to do the same. Freedom and democracy must be constantly guarded and protected, both abroad and from within. We must always be skeptical of those who want conformity and control. Even in free nations, we see alarming signs and new challenges to liberty. A small number of social media platforms are acquiring immense power over what we can see and over what we are allowed to say. A permanent political class is openly disdainful, dismissive and defiant of the will of the people. A faceless bureaucracy operates in secret and weakens democratic rule. Media and academic institutions push flat-out assaults on our histories, traditions, and values. In the United States, my administration has made clear to social media companies that we will uphold the right of free speech. A free society cannot allow social media giants to silence the voices of the people, and a free people must never, ever be enlisted in the cause of silencing, coercing, canceling, or blacklisting their own neighbors. As we defend American values, we affirm the right of all people to live in dignity. For this reason, my administration is working with other nations to stop criminalizing of homosexuality, and we stand in solidarity with LGBTQ people who live in countries that punish, jail, or execute individuals based upon sexual orientation. We are also championing the role of women in our societies. Nations that empower women are much wealthier, safer, and much more politically stable. It is therefore vital not only to a nation's prosperity, but also is vital to its national security to pursue women's economic development. Guided by these principles, my administration launched the Women's Global Development and Prosperity Initiatives. The WGDP is the first ever government-wide approach to women's economic empowerment, working to ensure that women all over the planet have the legal right to own and inherit property, work in the same industries as men, travel freely, and access credit and institutions. Yesterday, I was also pleased to host leaders for a discussion about an ironclad American commitment protecting religious leaders and also protecting religious freedom. This fundamental right is under growing threat around the world. Hard to believe, but 80% of the world's population lives in countries where religious liberty is in significant danger or even completely outlawed. Americans will never fire or tire in our effort to defend and promote freedom of worship and religion. We want and support religious liberty for all. Americans will also never tire of defending innocent life. We are aware that many United Nations projects have attempted to assert a global right to taxpayer-funded abortion on demand, right up until the moment of delivery. Global bureaucrats have absolutely no business attacking the sovereignty of nations that wish to protect innocent life. Like many nations here today, we in America believe that every child, born and unborn, is a sacred gift from God. There is no circumstance under which the United States will allow international entries to trample on the rights of our citizens, including the right to self-defense. That is why this year I announced that we will never ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty, which would threaten the liberties of law-abiding American citizens. The United States will always uphold our constitutional right to keep and bear arms. We will always uphold our Second Amendment. The core rights and values America defends today were inscribed in America's founding documents. Our nation's founders understood that there will always be those who believe they are entitled to wield power and control over others. Tyranny advances under many names and many theories, but it always comes down to the desire for domination. It protects not the interests of many, but the privilege of few. Our founders gave us a system designed to restrain this dangerous impulse. They chose to entrust American power to those most invested in the fate of our nation, a proud and fiercely independent people. The true good of a nation can only be pursued by those who love it, by citizens who are rooted in its history, who are nourished by its culture, committed to its values, attached to its people, and who know that its future is theirs to build or theirs to lose. Patriots see a nation and its destiny in ways no one else can. Liberty is only preserved, sovereignty is only secured, democracy is only sustained, greatness is only realized by the will and devotion of patriots. In their spirit is found the strength to resist oppression, the inspiration to forge legacy, the goodwill to seek friendship, and the bravery to reach for peace. The love of our nations makes the world better for all nations. So to all the leaders here today, join us in the most fulfilling mission a person could have, the most profound contribution anyone can make. Lift up your nations, cherish your culture, honor your histories, treasure your citizens, make your country strong and prosperous and righteous, honor the dignity of your people, and nothing will be outside of your reach. When our nations are greater, the future will be brighter, our people will be happier, and our partnerships will be stronger. With God's help, together we will cast off the enemies of liberty and overcome the oppressors of dignity. We will set new standards of living and reach new heights of human achievement. We will rediscover old truths, unravel old mysteries, and make thrilling new breakthroughs. And we will find more beautiful friendship and more harmony among nations than ever before. My fellow leaders, the path to peace and progress and freedom and justice and a better world for all humanity begins at home. Thank you. God bless you. God bless the nations of the world. And God bless America. Thank you very much.
Please listen to President President Trump give a speech in front of the United Nations Committee talking about a wide range of different topics, sticking to the script, it seems like, Paul.
Yes, I think he led off with trade, which is obviously a big issue right now, singling out China and some of the discussions going along there. But kind of saying overall, the U.S. wants a more level playing field as it relates to global trade. And then kind of pivoted to China, and kind of made some comments as it related to Hong Kong, and that the world is watching, and that he expects and the world expects for China to kind of maintain its agreement with Hong Kong.
Yeah, although he did really say that he was not looking for war, that the U.S. did not want any kind of military altercation. So that is one aspect of this. We should just say that the market response, the NASDAQ is actually a bit lower following those comments. The S&P has pared its gains up now 0.2%. Let's get some of the details of what's going on in markets. John Tucker has that for us with the Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
Yeah, Lisa, the stocks overall just pared their earlier gains. As you say, the NASDAQ, tech-heavy NASDAQ, is now negative following Mr. Trump's speech. S&P 500 up just 7 points right now. That's up 0.3%. We're at 29.99. The NASDAQ Composite Index 8 points lower. Mr. Trump took aim at China as well as social media companies. If you look at some of the social media companies, Twitter right now, that's down 1.3%. Facebook shares, they're down about 0.6%. Again, the NASDAQ down about 8 points. In addition, the U.S. consumer confidence declining more than forecasted September. Remember, it is the U.S. consumer that's been keeping the economy humming along. Americans' expectations with the economy and the job market have deteriorated, and that, of course, poses a risk to household spending that's underpinning growth. Right now, as we look at crude oil, that's down 96 cents, 57.69. We're also getting a bid to Treasuries, the 10-year of 14.30 seconds, the yield down to 167. We check the markets for you every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, we just heard President Trump give his prepared remarks to the United Nations. To get the latest on kind of some feedback on kind of what we heard from President Trump's comments, we welcome Celia Mosin, U.S. Treasury reporter for Bloomberg News, joins us on the phone from Washington, D.C. Celia, thanks so much for joining us. What were your initial thoughts of President Trump's speech before the United Nations?
Well, he talked a lot about giving a anti-globalist message there. I mean, that's what we heard. We heard about America's unrivaled military might. We heard him talk about not accepting a bad deal with China, that globalism has caused past leaders to ignore their national interests, and that every country has a right to defend their borders, and that anyone who reaches the U.S. will be turned away. So it was a little bit of a divisive message to a group of leaders who are trying to work multilaterally.
I think that it would be important to talk about the delivery a little bit, because you're saying that there was a divisive message, and he did talk about abortion, and he talked about a lot of things. But I'm just wondering what you thought about his delivery.
I mean, look, it went on for longer than it was supposed to, as a lot of UN speeches do. It was a little bit stilted. He was reading from a teleprompter. In the beginning, it was very spirited, talking about China and talking about, sort of globalism and what it's done. But it did sort of toward the end, whether he got tired, this is not his... where he naturally tends to, really grab people's attention in these prepared teleprompter speeches. He's a little bit more passionate when he's speaking off the cuff.
And Celia, just also, he kind of spent a fair amount of time on Iran, kind of maintaining a very strong posture as it relates to U.S.-Iranian relations.
It was a strong posture, but the threat of war was absent from his remarks. He said he wants peace. He does not want war with anybody. So to me, it did signal that the door to peace is still open. He said the fresh sanctions will not be eased unless they change behavior, rather than saying, we're going to, lean more into this.
Saleh Mohsen, thank you so much for being with us. Saleh Mohsen is Bloomberg News U.S. Treasury reporter joining us from Washington, D.C. on the phone following the UN address. Right now, let's switch gears a little bit because...
Literally switch gears.
Literally switch gears and talk about the latest on Volkswagen with the chief executive officer being charged with market manipulation. Joining us now, Michael Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior European Autos Analyst. So what details do we know about the charges so far?
What we do know at the moment is that both the CEO, Herbert Diess, and the chairman, Hans-Dieter Poch, have been charged with market manipulation. So this is to do with Dieselgate, which the news on that broke in September 2015.
So, Michael, it seems like, 2015, I was going to say this has been going on for a long time. Just summarize for us what the impact has been on the company, first and foremost.
Well, in terms of Dieselgate, the impact has been huge. It's probably cost the company around 30 billion euros in terms of costs for vehicles that they've taken off the road in terms of fines. And what this charge today reminds us is that although Volkswagen has done a lot in terms of changing their strategy and pushing forward towards electrification, Dieselgate is still very much in the background, and there's still a huge amount of fines, billions worth of fines, that potentially could still arise from Dieselgate in the future.
So what are the individual liabilities of the chief executive officer and chair given these charges?
Well, these are personal liabilities, so these are personal criminal charges, and it's very similar to what happened with Porsche SE. So when Porsche SE tried to take over Volkswagen back in 2008, they were charged, the CEO and the CFO were charged with market manipulation on a personal level. And this went through the courts for many, many years, and it's very difficult to prove, in fact. And actually, both the Porsche SE CEO and CFO were found not guilty.
So it's interesting. We don't typically see C-suite individuals face personal liability. How common? You mentioned Porsche. Is this something that is fairly common in the European markets?
It's actually very rare in Germany. So that's why the company itself doesn't believe there's any liability for the company itself. And you've got to remember that post-Dieselgate, they went through some thorough compliance processes and overlooked what actually happened during the crisis. And they believe there is no sort of case to come against them. But as we've seen today, because charges against the actual individuals and not the company, possibly there are some sort of issues to deal with here.
So the actual charges, market manipulation, can you talk about why that's the charge?
Well, what the prosecutors are trying to say is that although the actual news on Dieselgate came out in September 2015, actually the CEOs and the board of management knew about it much earlier. So at the moment, Volkswagen has about 8 or 9 billion of charges or litigation against it, because what the litigees are saying is that the management knew about Dieselgate before it was announced. In fact, they're saying that they knew about it many months, even years before it was announced.
So it's interesting, Mike. I'm looking at the 5-year chart of Volkswagen. The stock has really underperformed the German market overall. How is this company trying to get back, get away from to separate itself from this issue and try to get back to kind of growing the company again?
Yeah, and that's why the timing's probably so unfortunate, because he's a relatively new CEO, Herbert Diess. He became CEO at the beginning of 2008, and he's really accelerated the electrification strategy. So they're looking to have 70 EVs out by 2023. We're just seeing the fruits of this strategy with the launch of the Volkswagen ID.3 in Frankfurt a couple of weeks ago. We've also got the Porsche Taycan, which had a very successful launch. And he's really sort of trying to steer away from Dieselgate, and he's also committed the company to being carbon neutral by 2050. So he's making the right noises in terms of making the company more environmentally friendly. But unfortunately, we still have Dieselgate lurking in the background.
So how much more do we have to go through before it's done? I mean, there were reports of the U.S. prosecutors going after Volkswagen as well in the U.S. Where are we in terms of the progress of the situation?
Well, just to give you the example of Porsche SE, so the market manipulation charges first against the company, not just the management, relate back to 2008, and there's still 5.4 billion of litigation still going through. So that's 11 years later. So that just gives you an example how long these cases can take to actually come to fruition. So we're still at very early stages there.
Michael Dean, thank you so much for joining us. Michael is the Senior European Autos Analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from Bloomberg's London radio studio, talking about Volkswagen and some of the challenges there that continue to plague the company from Dieselgate.
This is WBBR New York, WDCH-FM Bowie, Baltimore, Washington, WJZ-FM HD2 Catonsville, WRCA Watertown, WBOS HD2 Brookline, Boston, WNBP Newburyport, KNEW Oakland, KOSF 103.7 FM HD2 San Francisco, and Sirius XM Satellite Radio Channel 119. This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Are we on the brink of a more serious downturn?
I've always thought of the municipal bond market as a little bit of a safe haven.
Banks are going to have to start paying their depositors more.
Are we still in that mode where we're buying the dips?
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
Cash, if you're looking at treasury bills, provides a higher return than stocks and bonds here in the U.S.
If your consumer is a woman, you're more likely to be a growth company.
Longer-term interest rates can go down, even with short-term interest rates still going up a little bit.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Coming up, how concerned should people be about the fact that consumer confidence appears to be waning a bit in the United States? We'll talk about that. Plus, we'll talk with 7th Generation Chief Executive Officer Joey Bergstein about that company's attempt to combat global warming. Right now, though, let's head over to our own John Tucker for a Bloomberg Business Flash. John.
All right, Lisa and Paul, Treasuries rally as President Trump's criticism of China at his UN speech. That has dampened trade optimism. We also got a reading on consumer confidence that missed estimates. Stocks, right now, the major averages there are mixed, again, paring their gains. S&P 500 churning near 3,000 for a 10th session. The early gains faded on the consumer data, and as the president accused China of manipulating its currency and stealing intellectual property in remarks just weeks before planned high-level trade talks with China. BTIG Chief Equity and Derivative Strategist Julian Emanuel says President Trump does know he has to make a trade deal soon.
We think that he's very incentivized to see a stronger economy.
Also, you had stocks climbing on confirmation the meeting would take place earlier. 10-year Treasury yield, that right now is back to 167. You get a bid to Treasuries of 14.30 seconds. In his UN speech, the president also taking aim at social media. Look at some of those stocks. Facebook right now, that's down about 0.4%. And we also have NYMEX crude down to $1.05 right now, 57.59. We check the markets every 15 minutes during the trading day right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa and Paul.
John Tucker, thank you so much. As John was mentioning, kind of a mixed market here. Let's see where we might see some action in the small caps. We welcome Bloomberg Stocks Editor Dave Wilson. Dave, what are you seeing in the world of small cap?
Well, I'm seeing losses. We can start there. The Russell 2000 index is down 0.6%, and the S&P 500 is higher by 0.1%. So definite contrast there. One of the Russell's steepest declines belongs to Neogen, whose ticker is NEOG. The maker of food safety and animal health products has lost about 12%. Fiscal first quarter earnings and revenue trailed analysts' lowest estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Clovis Oncology, ticker CLVS, has fallen more than 9%. The cancer drug developer was lowered to the equivalent of sell from hold from buy at SVB Leerink. The firm's 12-month share price estimate was cut by 56% to $10. By the way, the stock's trading at $4.15 at the moment, so there you go. R1RCM, whose ticker is also RCM, has dropped more than 7%. Chief Financial Officer Christopher Riccardi resigned from the provider of medical back office services. Now, the Russell's biggest gain belongs to New Age Beverages, ticker NBEV. The maker of CBD-infused drinks has climbed 19%. after gaining approval to sell the products in Japan. And USA Technologies, ticker USAT, has added 12.5%. The trucking company's largest shareholder increased its stake yesterday to about 14%. That's according to a regulatory filing.
Dave Wilson, Bloomberg Stocks editor, thank you so much for being with us. Meanwhile, in markets, we are looking at U.S. consumer confidence posting the biggest drop since the start of the year. This data dropped at 10 a.m. Eastern time and really had a significant market effect as people look to the consumer to continue the expansion of the United States. And frankly, this does not bode well. Lynn Franco joining us now, Senior Director of Economic Indicators and Surveys at the Conference Board. Lynn, what did you make of this reading that was below expectations?
Well, we've sort of been doing this back and forth with consumer confidence for the past year now, and it seems that this time around, once again, it's the escalation in trade and tariff tensions that consumers are citing as a reason for concern. And what we're seeing here is, sort of, I think, a plateauing of consumer confidence. And while we can continue to hover at these levels, which still remain strong, I think we need to sort of keep our eye on what happens over the coming months and whether or not this turns into an actual erosion in confidence or if just another sort of bump in the road.
So, Lynn, it seems like consumer confidence, we always go back to jobs and the employment rate. And right now the unemployment rate is, obviously very, very low. People who want jobs seem to be able to find jobs and wages are growing, albeit modestly. What are some of the warning signs out there for you as it relates to the consumer?
Well, I think one thing we're seeing both in our survey and in the other data is that job growth is slowing. I mean, we're still adding jobs, but the pace at which we're moving forward seems to have slowed a bit. And we see that come up in the percent of consumers who are telling us that, they feel jobs are plentiful. That went down by 5.5 points. And looking ahead, too, they expressed a little bit of concern about where the job market is heading. So I think we need to sort of keep our pulse on, the pace of job growth, because that will definitely impact consumer confidence.
How much does this stem directly from trade concerns, the pullback in manufacturing, and how much is this a broader slowdown that expands into services?
I think what we're seeing here, at least, is sort of the short-term or the one-off impact, let's say, of the trade and tariff escalation that we saw in August. But if you look at the overall trend in consumer confidence, we've really been moving sideways now for quite some time, and it seems to be little news both in terms of, employment growth or even wage growth that's really going to sort of support a significant increase or strengthening in consumer confidence. So it could be that we continue to sort of move sideways for quite some time, or again, it could be the beginning sort of the end, which we don't think it is at this point. We just think it's more sort of, sideways movement.
So, Lynn, I know we don't like to read much into a one-month trend. 1 month is not a trend to make, as they say. Just give us a sense of kind of how your index has been trending over the last, 6 to 12 months.
We've really been moving, again, sideways. So typical to what one sees sort of at the very mature end of a business cycle, there's really sort of no more upward momentum. But, the silver lining here is that we're at relatively strong levels. So for now, it looks like this is going to continue to support consumer spending, but we just need to really keep an eye on how consumers' expectations are next month and the following month. I mean, if we begin to see continued softening there, then we could begin to worry about, are consumers going to be able to support growth in the coming quarters?
I'm just wondering how this is a bleed through into the economy. I mean, if there is, say, a sustained slowdown or decline in consumer confidence next month and the month after, what can we expect in terms of the economic read through?
Well, I think the key point will be that as consumers grow more uncertain, both in terms of their own future and the future of the expansion in the economy in general, they begin to sort of, pull back in terms of spending. You're not going to go out there sort of and, take on additional credit if you're concerned about your job and you're concerned about growth. So some of the big ticket items, let's say, for instance, autos could see a softening or discretionary spending as well as one of the first signs where you see consumers, tend to eat out less, do sort of recreational type of activities.
Lynn Franco, thanks so much for checking in with us. Lynn Franco is the Senior Director of Economic Indicators for the Conference Board, calling us and chatting about the Consumer Confidence Index for the latest month. It came in weaker, showed some decline in the index, suggesting that maybe the consumer's getting a little bit nervous out there. And certainly, the employment situation remains very strong for the U.S. consumer. But perhaps on the margin, some of these uncertainties that we're seeing from some of the trade negotiations and trade uncertainty, it's not just the corporate level, it may be impacting the outlook for the consumer. So getting the latest read there. We'll certainly look forward to the next several months, as Lynn suggested, to see if any kind of trend is developing as it relates to the consumer and the weakness. But again, jobs remain plentiful and wages continue to grow, which seems to be the main driver. Right now, let's head down to our 99.1 studios in Washington, D.C. for World and National Headlines with Nathan Hager. Nathan.
Paul, President Trump is rebuking globalism at the UN General Assembly.
Wise leaders always put the good of their own people and their own country first. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots.
In his annual speech to the world body, the president said he won't accept a bad trade deal with China. He called on the world to respond to what he calls Iran's bloodlust. And he said undermining border security harms human rights. Before the speech, the president reacted to growing calls for impeachment over his July 25th phone call with the new leader of Ukraine.
I think it's ridiculous. It's a witch hunt. I'm leading in the polls. They have no idea how they stop me. The only way they can try is through impeachment.
The president is now acknowledging he ordered a delay of $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. He says it was because he was upset Europe isn't contributing more. That dispute with the EU had not been disclosed till now. Democrats say it could be impeachable if the president used that delay as leverage to investigate former Vice